So everyone knows that the housing market has a lot of problems, but very few people seem to know about the one big problem underlying it all. We know that home prices have accelerated far beyond incomes. We know that interest rates have risen at a historic pace, effectively freezing the housing market because buyers can afford less mortgage and home sellers aren't ready to accept a huge price cut yet. We know that sales volumes generally lead prices. Or in other words, if the total amount of housing transactions goes down, then prices generally do too. Think of it like a hot commodity. If there's a lot of interest in something, if there's a lot of sales around it, then that generally means that the path of least resistance is for the price to go up. But if there's not a lot of interest in something, then the opposite is true. So unless the housing market falls at least about 30% or so in aggregate to bring it in line with mortgage affordability, we've got a big problem on our hands that doesn't just affect my generation, but most of the entire world as we know it. And that problem is demographics. There's a common phrase that demographics is destiny. And if that's true, then our destiny could be pulling us in the wrong direction. Today, I would like to explore this possibility together. So first of all, let's refresh ourselves on what demographics actually is. Demographics, in a general sense, is a breakdown of the population into specific categories. It can be age, it can be weight, it can be location. There's many different ways to slice this up. But when people say demographics is destiny, they're usually talking about one specific category, and that is age. The breakdown of an age of a population is so incredibly important for its future growth and prosperity, and it can literally be the difference between the future getting better or worse. To get a sense of just how powerful this is, let's look at a helpful chart. The population pyramid. Here we can see the demographic breakdown by age for a particular country. In this case, we have both Italy and Japan. Do you notice any similarities between these two charts? What you should see is that they roughly resemble the shape of an inverted pyramid. This is one of the worst shapes that a demographic structure can take, a fact that is supported by the economic struggles both countries face. To understand why this is the case, we need to take a look at the role each age group plays in the population. Think about it like this. As you go up in age, past about 50 or so, you become less productive and more resource intensive on a relative basis. That's because you begin retirement, you take vacations, you grow old, and inevitably experience health problems. So you're consuming much more from society than you are contributing at this stage of your life. But before that, between 20 to 40, let's say, this is generally the most productive period of people's lives. They are contributing more to society than they are taking. So if you want a population that fosters growth and has a destiny pointing towards a better future, you'd ideally want one with a strong bulge towards the 20 to 40 age group. Unfortunately, that's becoming less and less the case over time, not just for Italy and Japan, but for a lot of the developed world. As you can see, the share of the population of 65 plus year olds is only increasing over time. This chart is inverted, by the way. See the percentages on the y-axis. And as a result, according to an analysis done by Eric Basmajian, he shows how an increasingly aging demographic leads towards lower and lower real economic growth, eventually set to potentially arrive at 0% economic growth by 2030, should nothing change to break this trend. But what does 0% economic growth actually mean? After all, don't we hear a lot of people speak critically these days about our seemingly endless desire for growth? Wouldn't it be just fine for us to live with what we have? It's a lot. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. When we speak about economic growth, we're not necessarily just speaking about people having more things or consuming more resources. A lot of the time, we're actually talking about new and smarter and safer ways of doing things. We're talking about increased living standards for everyone. We're also talking about finding more efficient ways to use the resources that we have available to us. And no growth, or even worse, contractions, generally leads to the opposite. If we look to history, if history can be any guide here, we see that nations who have experienced prolonged periods of no growth or negative growth, they generally get lost to the sands of time. The size of the pie gets smaller for everyone, so everybody has less, and this generally leads to fighting from within and without a nation. Suffice to say, it's best to be avoided. So this is why demographics are a major concern of the future. But how does housing relate to this? How are demographics the real big problem underlying the housing bubble? We'll get to that juicy question. But first, this discussion has been a little bit on the heavy side, eh? Maybe we need to lighten the mood a little bit first. Let's see here. Oh, I know. I watched a really good show recently. It's called Vinland Saga on Netflix. It's an anime. If you like animes at all, I'd highly, highly recommend checking it out. Oh. Hello there, puppy. Hi, sweetie. Hi.
Nice.
You coming to say hello to everybody?
That's nice.
That's nice. As you may have noticed, Autumn's getting a lot bigger these days. She might just be chilling in the background. Don't mind her. Anyway, I usually find 1 or 2 shows per year that I really, really like, and Vinland Saga is definitely going to be one of those shows for this year. The last one before that, I think, was probably Cyberpunk, another high tier one, I'd say. Isn't that right, Choom? But Cyberpunk came out when I was traveling in Europe, so I couldn't watch it because it wasn't available over there for some reason on Netflix. So I was very, very disappointed in that, until I listed the help of a very powerful technology who also happens to be the sponsor of today's video. NordVPN. When I'm traveling, being able to use a VPN is awesome because just in one click I can connect to the internet as if I was back home. This makes it easy to do everything to making sure I could watch Cyberpunk to also just getting Canadian Google searches when I'm trying to look something up. I also found it particularly useful for doing things like banking overseas because a lot of the times if you access something like that from a foreign location, your banking institution just locks you out of your account. And that can be a complete headache to deal with. So logging in as if I was from Canada just made the process way more smooth. It's funny to say, but that trip was actually the very first time that I've used a VPN. I know. But now I don't think I would ever not use one when I'm traveling. And when I did use it, I kind of felt a little bit like a grandpa being like, gee, would you check out this here technology? That's that growth we're talking about, that technological growth. Anyways, I digress. If you think using a VPN could be useful to you, you can check out the link in the description down below for NordVPN, and you can get an exclusive deal there as well as a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thank you for sponsoring this video. So if growth is tied to demographics, then the next thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that demographics are tied to the housing market. How so? Well, let's think about it for a moment. In traditional life progression, you complete basic schooling by the age of 18 or so, and then potentially pursue higher education or directly enter the workforce. Shortly after this, it has historically been very common for people to get married, buy a house, and have kids. 3 charts are important to note here. Here we can see that from the 1950s until 1980, most people were getting married before the age of 25. We can also see that the fertility rate during that time, meaning the number of children born per mother, was well above 2. This was the baby boom. 2 is a very important number because this is the replacement number. It takes 2 births per mother in order to sustain the population. Any amount higher will increase the population and any amount lower will shrink it. And finally, look how the demographic structure of Canada, for example, changed from the 1950s through the 70s. All of this was a recipe for a very, very productive society during this time period. This was the post-war boom. But now those trends have reversed. People are getting married later, having less kids, and the demographic structure looks less promising. What's happened? Well, I think there are a number of factors like education and an increased number of women entering the workforce. I think another answer to this question is the accessibility of the housing market. From a personal anecdote perspective, I don't think that I would have kids until I have a place that I can call my own. And I don't know when that will be. It doesn't seem like it'll be anytime soon living in Toronto. And so this delay of life stages like marriage and home ownership and having kids, I think adds further fuel to the fire of this aging demographic. We're already seeing it with millennials and Gen Z. Gen Z has been a very small generation, and if they also have a delayed and possibly pessimistic view of the future, then the generation after them could be even smaller. According to Statistics Canada, if the country's fertility continues to decline further in the coming years, Canada could join the lowest low fertility countries, a situation associated with rapid population aging and increased stress on the labor market, public health care, and pension systems. If the housing market does not in some way become more accessible to younger generations, ultimately at the expense of older generations who would be selling the homes, I don't really see a way that that fertility rate is going to go back to that 2 level. So then, are we just doomed to head towards 0% economic growth? Fortunately, maybe not. A country like Canada is able to correct a large part of its demographic structure through immigration. Without immigration, Canada would be a shell of what it is today and would be much more like Japan or Italy. But is immigration something we can rely on forever? Could there come a time when a country like Canada or America isn't as attractive of a place to live? Should we be putting a lot of our eggs in that basket? That's where innovation also comes in. It seems like we are on the cusp of major breakthroughs across a bunch of different industries like AI, robotics, genomics, renewable energy systems, the list goes on. The fact that we just have less sheer bodies is definitely a problem, but if each one of those people becomes more productive through innovations in technology, not to mention the more efficient and sustainable use of resources, then our demographic situation might not matter as much. When I talk with my 100-year-old granny, I get the sense that she in no way could have imagined the abundant world that we now live in today. I think even now, that she's living in it, she still struggles to fully comprehend it. What if that's the case for us? I know we've been through some dark times very recently, and we're still going through them, and that the future can seem a bit bleak. But what if that's what is ahead of us as well? A future better than anything we can possibly comprehend right now. As I said in my last video, that was the case for much of history. So why would it be any different today?